Oh yeah, Michelle, let me invite you as co-host.
Hi,
I think it
folks.
was added as a speaker. Yeah, there we go.
Michelle, I'm going to keep inviting, and you can actually manage the event. And I'm going to invite Asif as the co-host.
It's interesting how long it took us to agree to disagree. Okay,
You're never going to
good,
believe what actually happened.
good things come to those who wait. So I guess we're fine.
Patience is a virtue.
I guess not when the Taliban use it. So they they overstretch our patience at times.
Absolutely.
Sarah is here. Ubaid is here. Qazizai Saib is here. Zuhal, Anisa, Hamdil Saib, salam to everyone of the Muhtaramin that are here.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to give it a couple minutes for everyone to get in since we did have some technical difficulties this morning, and I think we'll probably get started in about 2 minutes. All right, looks like all of our speakers are here. Thank you for coming. Sorry about the technical difficulties this morning. So I guess it's no secret that Afghans are divided. They are polarized, and it makes sense for this polarization to transfer into our conversations, social media, and generally beyond that. I think we've all seen droves of fake news, hate, and division. And for the most part, the question that enters my mind is did it get this bad? And why can't we meet in the middle? Why can't we agree to disagree? And why can't we have constructive conversations? So that's sort of the topic that we wanted to address in this space. It seems to be cyclical. We have we are a group of people with different perspectives. We can be divided on certain points, but overall, there are individuals and actors and organizations that take advantage of this to get attention or to appeal to a polarized group of Afghans. They tend to communicate in more polarized ways, and in turn, they have their mark on our community by further and further dividing, and sort of round and round we go. So that's the environment that we're in. And today we have a great panel to pose the question of how do we have constructive conversations in this sort of crazy environment. We're planning on breaking this up into 3 general sections. Basically, what is the environment like? What are the challenges? Why is this important? What are the real world consequences? And lastly, what are the solutions? How can we have constructive conversations in this type of environment? How can we agree to disagree? I'd like to introduce Brother Tawab. He's going to give an introduction to Asif and further delve into the topic and introduce our panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you all for attending and being patient with us. I appreciate your time, and hopefully it'll be something that we can benefit all. So, as Asif, we advocate for economic solutions for Afghans that will enable its people to stand on their feet and not be on the internet, not be a burden on the international community. Our focus, we're not affiliated with any group. The only focus that we have is the Afghan people and how can we best help them, whether that means policy change, pursuing policy change, or doing stuff actively in terms of humanitarian aid or sustainable, getting them jobs. So that's we're a fairly new organization, and we have a lot ahead of us. But we appreciate your support and your continued support. So first, I'd like to request if you guys can all share and tweet this event, and so this way we can get more people, especially our speakers. And I think the list is building up. With that said, in terms of our speakers, we're fortunate to have 3 thought leaders who are gems in our community, and of course, these individuals are known to all of us. So we've got Brother Obaidullah Bahir, who is an Afghan thought leader, a professor at AUAF, American University of Afghanistan, and he's also a fellow or visiting professor at the New School. Hopefully that'll happen soon. Of course, we've got our esteemed brother Wahid Hindil, whom many of you know. None of them need any introductions, but I've Brother Wahid is again an Afghan thought leader. He's served as an advisor for an NGO in the past year or so. And just to shorten up the time, I'll just keep going. And of course, we've got our dear sister Shukla Zadran, who is a rising star in the Afghan community, and we look forward to. We expect a lot, hopefully, in the future from her. She was a former member of the Youth Parliament or representative of the Youth Parliament in Afghanistan. So with that said, we'll get started with the first topic. Michelle, feel free to actually initiate. I just want to do something in the meantime. And of course, we want to discuss the challenges. What are the current challenges in terms of engagement among Afghans. We know that we're divided in so many different ways. If we can identify some of those key challenges, and then we can go into it. So, Michelle, if you can please take over, I'll join back in, or I'll re-engage in a little bit.
Sure, no problem. Okay, so the first thing that we wanted to talk about were the challenges in our current environment. So, Obaidullah John, if you can start us off and discuss what Afghan Twitter and the general social media conversation is like, and what are our challenges?
Thank you so much, Tawab, Michelle, the whole team. I know we were, for the benefit of time, trying to keep introductions short, but Rahamdil Saib has served at the highest level of government. I actually used to work for him at one point, so you don't often have fond memories of such setups, but Rahamdil is just a wonderful human being like that. Shkola was the youth representative of the UN in Afghanistan. She's always had a sane head screwed on. She's also been my student, so there's that sense of pride associated with her work. So, thank you for having me. I think this is a very important time to discuss a very vital issue. And I'm going to try and hopefully limit this to a few minutes because I think there are more issues, and I would specifically want to talk a lot more about what can be done rather than the problems themselves, because the problems are very evident, hopefully. But to break it down, I think there are quite a few things that we need to look at. I think everyone needs to pick up and read more of Chomsky. Especially in the current times, it's important because he does have a really good lens of looking at media. Um, it might be outdated because his initial theory of manufacturing consent is very important for Afghans to know today. So, what in essence Chomsky argues is uh, that the elites, those who own society, the 1%, they own the media as well. And to protect their interests, and sometimes he looks at it through an economic lens as well, to protect their interests, the media acts in a way where you can only say and do things that are sanctioned or approved by them or work for their benefit. Now, Chomsky in the 90s and 80s, when the explosion of technology and media was happening, he has written and spoken about a change that might happen in that trend. So it's not necessarily the rise of citizen journalists. It was a two-edged sword. Whereas we had a crazy amount of access to information, there was also this information shock, right? And I do remember actually reading a book when I was very young. My tutor used to read this book and explain it to us, called The Information Shock. And it was about how digital media and technology was going to send us into a headspace where there was just so much to process and such little time. So very often we would become lazy about double checking what was being fed to us. So, in essence, I want you to imagine a world where everyone has a smartphone, everyone has an audience. Basically, everyone is on a stage. So, you can say whatever you want to. Political correctness entails that very often your freedom of speech is not infringed. And when it's infringed based on definitions devised by those who are in power and majority. And again, the tyranny of majority is a concept that was popularized in the United States. And that too has been used both ways. So I just want you to imagine the mediascape um, as something that is material. And it is material so that space can never be a vacuum. There will always have to be something there. And what has happened recently in Afghanistan and the Taliban's coming to power, and we will talk about the concept of totalitarian regimes. there's always this tendency of making sure that they overcorrect and over control the mediascape. And whilst doing that, the Taliban not only managed to close a lot of media outlets, but there are very strict rules on how media is supposed to conduct itself. There are so many journalists, so many good journalists I know that have always had a balanced voice about Afghanistan, facing trouble existing in Afghanistan or coming back to Afghanistan. All of those are problems. So when you created that, you already created fertile ground for other networks that were ripe for the buying because they cost very little money. Networks like Hashte Sub and Italat Rose were going to be acquired multiple times by bigger networks within Afghanistan, but they realized that they didn't really have much traffic, so they were never acquired. So you put those networks on the marketplace. And then you have other networks that were established by foreign money. They were established for an agenda. And since you have such a blackout of the media within Afghanistan, so for example, a very simple thing that you can think about is ISK beyond urban centers, right? The fact that every news we hear about ISKP either comes from cities like Jalalabad, Kabul, or one or two more cities. How real is the ISKP existence within the larger Afghan rural population or rural geography? And you don't have that kind of information. And necessarily it's because you don't have media there. And that then creates grounds for these networks that have agendas that are serving a purpose to manufacture their own truth. And when they manufacture their truth and you have enough bots and enough people falling for those bots, you are creating a truth and creating a grand narrative. And hopefully, when we get into talking about how we move ahead, we need to understand that these grand narratives need to be challenged. I think the current agenda for those who are manipulating the mediascape within Afghanistan is to sell Afghanistan as a possible war zone for different investors that are looking for that war. And it is polarizing Afghanistan, not only inside Afghanistan, but making Afghanistan a polarized issue within different states and governments that have to make policies about Afghanistan. If that happens and that does become our reality, we will see a huge inconsistency in policies with every regime change within the United States and other major players. We will see major shifts within policies. All of that is very dangerous for Afghanistan. It has this huge multiplying effect of human suffering that we will spend years to curtail. We are already suffering from 40 years of war. We are already suffering from an occupation that outlived its self for 20 years and ended up leaving us with such a malfunctioning economy, and such a polarized Afghanistan. So the idea is there are people out there, they seek their agenda, they're seeking a war that they know they cannot win, but a war they want to rage long enough, or wage long enough to find interventionists who are willing to come in and probably separate the geography of Afghanistan. And that is something we all need to be very mindful of. We should not have the fate of North and South Sudan awaiting us. So this polarization eventually serves that purpose. And that's not the reality on the ground, but the politics that the Taliban are taking forward right now is feeding that fire as well. So there's a lot of blame to go around, but there's a lot of ways we can avoid that. And hopefully we can talk about that in this session.
Thank you very much, Bahir. Shkola John, same question. Can you talk to us about some of the current challenges in our environment right now?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Michelle and Tawab John, for this initiative, for making this space, and for inviting me. First of all, I would like to correct my teammates. I am the Afghan youth representative to the United Nations, and I would like to add that I am a graduate student. I'm studying Masters of Global Affairs in New York University. And to answer your question, I would like to say that as Bahir Seb mentioned, there are a lot of things happening nowadays. But I would like to focus on the four types of groups or individuals that are involved in current discourse of Afghanistan, or in current things that are happening in Afghanistan. And they are the first type of the first group of people are those who are striving to to find a common ground, to find solutions, to initiate constructive discussions, and to approach the ongoing challenges, to find solutions for the ongoing challenges in a more sensitive and responsible ways. And unfortunately, the second type of people involved in this discourse are those who actually have no idea what are they doing, and they even don't have any idea that um, the way they are approaching these problems, the way they are talking, participating in their conversations, or feeding the news into the public, or entertaining the ideas that they are entertaining, it's actually harmful. It's actually adding to the tension, and it's actually adding to the misery of Afghanistan, and they are actually doing harm to the Afghan people. And the third type of people that are involved in the discourse are the neutral ones. They are like more of them are like people who are the actual victims of the current challenges and problems. So we must do our best to be in the first category. We must try to find solutions, initiate approaches based on the human values, based on things that are good for Afghanistan. And to do this, to be to as the title of today's space is, how to initiate constructive discourse discussions, and how to find solutions at the end. I think first of all we need to keep in mind the circumstances and the experiences of human beings, and we need to learn that everyone who are a part of this era is actually their thoughts and their words and their behaviors are navigated by their experiences and by their situations and circumstances. And those situations and those circumstances can be, or those experiences can be, religious, cultural, or social. And once we understand this, we will be able to understand them and their pain. And for instance, when it comes to women's right, which is a very hot topic nowadays, considering the ongoing protests in Paktia province, when we talk about women's right, uh, there are a variety of thoughts and reactions about it. But most of them, most of the people, most of the population, when we talk about, when you call say women's right, they will start reacting negatively. We need, and the base of this reaction is their religious and social and cultural basis. So once you understand that basis, and then you will be able to find solutions in according to their basis. And then you will be able to engage with them, then you will be able to make them understand that what do you mean by saying advocating for women's rights. So I believe that respect, understanding, and engaging with opposite parties, no matter who they are, and also engaging those who are neutral, is very much helpful for future to initiate constructive discussions, and to find solutions for the problems, and to to turn the very polarized environment into a very civic environment.
Thank you very much, Gulajan. I think that was a really nice categorization of the environment. We'll save the questions for the end of the space today. The same question to you. What are the challenges in our current environment, according to your observation?
Thanks, Michelle. Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for having me. And just a side note, it's not easy to get the stage after Bahir, but I'll try. Just a few observations, not only on Twitter space, but outside Twitter space across Afghanistan. To begin with, like disagreement and agreement is a time-old phenomenon that has existed throughout history. Sometimes it costs a lot, and currently we're going through that phase. And hence, thank you very much for this initiative, and I hope it goes beyond this space and you push for this agenda to create this constructive discourse around things. My observation is, what are the current challenges? First of all, as a nation, even if we want to call ourselves that, and I'm being frank, as a nation, we don't have objective narratives. And when there are no objective narratives, and we are so far ahead of ourselves in confusion that we have even denounced our religious objective narratives as well. So lack of objective narratives could be the core issue with this agreement and disagreement, and basically individual narratives or narratives with agendas are taking up the space, and there is thousands of them, if not hundreds of thousands of them, and bringing people around agreeing on different, let's say about 1,000 different narratives with agendas is not an easy task, even if you do it academically. The other one is longevity of broken trust. In all honesty, being an Afghan, I think it is fair to be suspicious of the new space. But our trust has been broken over and over and over for so long that we question almost everything. And the skill to question things academically or in a more civilized, constructive manner, or go sort of head to head, that is not easily visible across the spectrum. We tend to go very emotional about things, which again, the other problem that we have is heightened emotions, like witnessing collapse after collapse of the government. It creates a lot of emotional bottlenecks. It creates a lot of resentments. When you resent reality, and let's I don't know, like my personal view, Afghans resent reality, their own reality, including everyone else's reality. When you resent reality, emotions are heightened. And when emotions are heightened, agreement suffers or completely gets slaughtered. The other problem that I see, we have somehow tricked ourselves into believing that there is too much at stake for everyone when we are dealing with political issues. Whereas, to be honest, it's just a political issue. Of course, it's affecting our lives. I live in Afghanistan, and I'm not downplaying that. But there isn't too much at stake for everyone. Of course, there are, like, women suffer more than men at the moment, but men are more vicious than women on Twitter space or and generally on media, simply because they are more visible. The last challenge or problem that I see is the constructed meaning, subjective constructed meaning with agendas. We have somehow created meanings behind new phenomena that aren't even tested or even examined. Let's for example, take Afghanistan, whether it should be divided into several parts as a federal state, or completely divided into Khorasan and Afghanistan and things like that. These things are real debates, yet there is no substance behind it, no data to back any claim or either of the claims. So these are the kind of problems when you look at it from a simplistic human point of view. I think these are the challenges we're currently facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James.
If I may just add one thing, Michelle, I think the 43 years of war, constant war, has affected all of us at an emotional level. Oftentimes we engage in an emotional manner where animosity, hate, anger, and sometimes even outright racism basically takes over, and we act in an emotional way. The psychologists refer to this as affective polarization. Affective is essentially a psychology word that alludes to emotions. Like we don't have just polarization; it's polarization based, which is mixed with emotions. So I just wanted to add that as far as the challenges. My master's was in political psychology, so we actually studied this extensively, at least in the case of the U.S. But it's not no different in Afghanistan. Please carry on.
Sure. So we talked about the challenges. I think, as noted, a lot of them are very obvious, but it was a very clear understanding of what we're up against. Then I would like to dive into solutions. So we know what type of an environment exists, and how can we...
Michelle, before we jump into solutions, can we, per your earlier statement, can we also just touch on the consequences, right? There are numerous other nations, countries that have gone through something similar, and we know what the consequences of the extreme aspect of this leads to.
Absolutely. Definitely, if the consequences, if we do not achieve the constructive conversations that we desperately need. So, if we can dive into both of those aspects, what are the real world consequences when we can't achieve a positive communication among each other? And also, what solutions can we put forward in order to be able to communicate with each other better and arrive at positive solutions? We'll start with you again, Bahir.
But Hijan, for the consequences, if we can keep it at 2 to 3 minutes, so this way we going back to your earlier statement, so we can then focus more on the solutions that might work better. Thanks.
Thank you. I already did discuss certain consequences that would entail if we continued down the current projection. But obviously, that doesn't mean it's set in stone. That doesn't mean our fates have been sealed. There will always be agendas. There will always be people who do not have the common good at heart. Maybe their definition of common good is different. Maybe they just don't sympathize with the larger sentiment. But that being said, hopefully, when we do move towards solutions, I think there are a lot of models to follow. And do not astaghfirullah me too hard when I do bring up Obama's work. Actually, a lot of times we look at Obama as this warmonger, which he might have been, but there were certain things he did for the United States and to counter polarization within the United States and breaking down what that meant. It didn't work out well because the consequence of it was Trumpism. But if there's one thing as a consequence that needs to be mentioned and added on is when you create polarized societies, I mean, the political awareness is this weird spectrum where if you're qualunquismos, which means politically apathetic completely, that's problematic. But when you're so overly polarized, what you do is you create the space for populist politics, and you will have a rise of populist narratives where they play with your sentiments and your emotions, and then that clouds your ability to know fact from fiction. And you already see that every day on social media, on traditional media, and how that narrative is weaved and created to produce this reality that might not be true. So hopefully when we talk about solutions, there'll be a lot of content there, so I'll save up time so that the others can jump in with consequences.
Wahijan or Shuklajan, if you can also, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I'll answer this question in simple words. It paves the ground for extreme hatred. And we will, if it continues, we will lose time, which can be utilized for building solidarity and unity and doing good stuff. And we will lose more lives and energies and talents and resources.
To me, it's the consequences we've witnessed for quite some time, and it's gonna get darker. But the bigger problem, as a consequence of these things that I see, is there is not a single credible voice anymore. Though there are pockets of individuals that they are trusted or somehow respected, but there is no sane voice for Afghanistan. Every single voice that echoes louder and clearer with the majority of people is a stakeholder into or a profiteer of Afghanistan's war, or even a victim. Like that's a very confusing term, whether we want to call some of our own people profiteers or victims of war. Those voices exist and they echo louder and clearer in all corners of Afghanistan. There is a kind of sophisticated effort behind target killing of all voices. And this is kind of scary because if we look at late Ansari, he was targeted. And if we look at Bakhtash, he was targeted. The two voices are extremely on two ends of spectrum, yet voices are being silenced. Unless it is a traditional, long lasting voice that has the control over our space. That would be the deadliest consequence of this when all Afghanistan is completely divided into a few narratives. That would be the deadliest consequence. Thanks.
Thank you, Randall. So, just to add to that, we mentioned this earlier, but when people are emotional and we are polarized, one of the other sad things that happen is that political elites who are vested for their own benefit, they can actually take advantage of the situation and further exacerbate the polarization. And that's really scary. It's like poison. Once it enters your body, it takes over. And of course, as you mentioned, this leads to mistrusts, threats of violence against others, hate crime, further divide and mistrust. And when we look at what happens in the Balkans or even in Nazi Germany, it started with dehumanization, demonization, vilification, marginalizing an entire group. And then over time, that led to committing the worst crimes, and people had no sympathy or empathy towards that group. So the extreme end of it, we see what happened in Balkans. Sadly enough, we had some of that in the 90s, even in Afghanistan, unfortunately. And I hope and pray um, we don't go down that path again, and we could take preemptive measures, and people don't necessarily, or there are bridges that can be made. Sorry, I didn't want to take too much time, but we can go into the solutions now. Uh, uh, so, Michelle, I'll leave it up to you again.
Sure. So the assessment has been that there is no objective narrative. There's little to no trust. So how do we find solutions, and how do we have constructive conversations in this type of environment? But here we'll go to you again for the solutions.
Sorry, I was trying to find where the unmute button was.
Bahir Saib,
But,
if I may, if
yeah.
everybody can actually just share this space so we can invite others, that would be great. I'd really appreciate it. Sorry, Bahir Saib, go ahead.
Yeah, we're going to start kicking people out if you don't share the space. But honestly, I mean, we say in Pashto, حياة ميرازي سي قازي زي سي بدلية وزا خبري وكم. I mean, I wish in the following spaces he can be here and he can uh, teach us uh, a lot of what he knows. Um, Okay, so I think solution-wise, let's just take it from a global level and then start mapping it smaller and smaller at scale to Afghanistan. So the global trend, all the way from the Greeks, we see that there is this leaning towards cosmopolitanism, stoicism in itself. Talks about how we are all global citizens. I'm not a citizen of Athens or Rome. I am but a citizen of the world. And that sort of globalization, when the right industrial revolution had happened and we thought that we were in an age of abundance, created this sense of camaraderie across the globe, where we thought that the global standard of living had to rise up. Entities such as the European Union were a manifestation of such a change in thinking. But then the counter to that was, we saw nations turning towards nationalism, and they started seeing that there was a possible scarcity. There was a need for looking at national interests over global interests and prioritizing that. Eventually we came towards this new rise of populism where specific groups are targeted, specific ethnicities, specific races, and specific classes are targeted to um, basically generate enough support for populist leaders that don't really care for the larger national or global narrative. And we've seen that happening in Afghanistan as well, where we've had people talk about nationalism for a while, and now, and since nation building never really happened in Afghanistan throughout the past decades, we see that we've reached a time where every ethnicity seems to have their figureheads who are trying to um, march them towards their agendas. I mean, even during the jihad against the Soviets, there were initial fractures of ethnicity happening, but it wasn't that widespread, and people weren't associating themselves with groups based on their ethnicity alone. A few things about Afghanistan that are important to remember: that um, we do have national security, human security is lacking, and that's also creating grounds for the Taliban's harsh counterinsurgency strategies, and then in reaction, creating reasons for polarization that are exacerbated by groups who see a benefit in it. Now, how do we engage? How do we engage? What does dialogue look like? And here I want you to think about Hannah Arendt, right? So Hannah Arendt has this story that you could probably write a novel about. There are novels probably about her life or the people around her. Her own mother wrote a book about her life. And then there's actually a movie as well, so you can watch that. But Hannah Arendt is the sort of the modern scholar of totalitarianism, and then beyond that, about how to deal with such situations. So totalitarianism, according to her, was different to tyrannical regimes, because tyrannical regimes really had a specific enemy that they targeted and prosecuted, whereas totalitarian regimes just generally use coercion and terror as a political tool. And when you have that happening, initially Hannah Arendt's
assessment is that there isn't much that can be done. And for that, she was bashed. Her being a Jewish scholar, that statement was very heavy coming from her. And then beyond that, what she does is she writes this book about one of the Nazis who was being prosecuted in the court, and she writes about those court hearings. And she writes about the banality of evil. So she talks about how evil isn't this grand scheme, isn't this demonic thinking or sentiment, but it's actually people acting like they're not persons, people delegating their own morality to a larger system. And that seems to happen very often in Afghanistan. We very often tend to forget that we are humans and the person sitting across us is human as well. And like Tawabse pointed out, this dehumanization sort of ends up becoming our bane and our fall. So the banality of evil actually helps us understand evil better, to learn to engage with that evil. And then that's where enters Jeffrey Goldfarb, who's an amazing mentor. He writes a book called The Politics of Small Things. And that's where all of this takes place politically. What he means is in the Eastern European bloc, when communism was at its dying days in the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, mostly, what happened was specific groups of people came together and they decided that if they couldn't control the grand narratives, so for example, grand narratives look like 9/11 happens, the United States government says, oh look, they invaded us. First the terrorists say, or those who attacked the trade center say that it's justified to kill citizens because they do it to us and this is part of the larger jihad. On the opposite end, you have people, politicians, policymakers in the United States coming up with this grand anti-terror narrative where they say, well, war is upon us and it's wartime, that means we can overlook a lot of our rules. um, that sort of grand narrative can be countered by the politics of small things. And the politics of small things takes its name from Arundhati Roy's God of Small Things, where there is one person, the main character of that novel, who is an achut. He is the lowest caste of Indian society. No one wants to interact with him. When he understands he can't control the grander narrative, what he does is he falls in love with this woman that is beyond his caste. He brings all the other rejects from society and creates the space for himself. And that's where it initially happens. So, just quickly to break it down, politics of small things looked like you exemplify the change you want to see. One, because that's where it is going to find its roots, its ground. Then you collect people and you create a space for those like minded people where you sit down and you engage. And then you take that out to the larger society and you start taking up space outside and beyond you. That is when you are across your opponent. This isn't rocket science. This has happened in the world. When I talked about Obama, what Obama did was, by virtue of being who he was, with Muslim parents, with the color of his skin, with his background, when he became president, he changed and challenged this grand narrative of what America was and what it stood for. Now, since it was done so abruptly, we had the counter of Trumpism. But for those who are still going astaghfirullah at the Obama example, you can look at Palestine as well. There are examples, and there's actually a very good book that hopefully I'll share the name of. It's called, I don't remember right now, but in it, they discuss the checkpoints that Israeli soldiers lay down for Palestinians and the interactions that happen there and how they define the way both of them see each other. And for the Palestinians, there was one simple slogan that said, Al Haya lazim tastamir, meaning, even if we are under occupation, our lives must go on. And through those interactions, they challenge the grand narratives. This is Islamic as well, because if you look at the Prophet's life, if you look at how he starts his movement, he exemplifies his message. Someone asked Aisha what the Prophet's manners were like. She says, "Kana khuluquhu al-Quran." his virtues were that of the Quran, right? So he exemplifies his message. Then he sits in the house of Arqam and he uses his friends to create this space where they are safe. And eventually, when they're ready, they march out into Mecca in 2 rows and spread that message there. What that looks like for Afghanistan, last 1 minute, is we have these conversations here. We don't want to create programs that are called reconciliation or reintegration, because the creates this moral hierarchy that we don't want, who's integrating into who. But we start creating spaces. Those spaces can look like um, study centers, they can look like vocational centers. And once that happens, we have two very different people that have come face to face after 20 years of war interacting with each other. Afghanistan is not going to change when the old guard that is supposedly banning schools change their mind or die. Afghanistan is going to change when you and I interact with the lowest ranking Taliban to the middle ranking Taliban, and they change and we change with them. Once both our thinkings find middle ground, the politics will follow. And dialogue is the key, engagement is the key, creating spaces to start with is the key. And we're already trying to work on that. These sessions help, but inshallah, work on the ground is going to lay the foundation for such things to happen. So it's not the end of the day. It's there is light at the end of the tunnel. We just have to walk towards it.
Thank you, Bahir Saib. Uh, Shukla John, if you can comment on solutions as well, and then we'll go to Rahim Saib. And then, of course, we will go to questionnaires. So those who have questions, please just bear with us while we finish this topic, and then we will open it up for Q&A.
Well, thank you. Look, the initial goal of those who are engaging in Afghanistan's discourse should be finding a common ground, not winning the argument or not defeating each other. And unfortunately, we lack this this point. We are not trying to find a common ground, but we are trying to defeat each other. And when it comes to finding a common ground, there are a few very simple tips that are useful for any discourse, for any argument, but it may vary based on circumstances, based on the nature of the discourse, but it is like common tips. Like, first of all, respect each other's thoughts, and respect each other's experiences. As I mentioned, respect each other's pain and emotions. And the second tip is actively listen. We need to learn how to listen to understand, not how to listen to just respond or to defeat the other party. And the current challenge is that those who are entertaining the tensions, or those who are entertaining unhealthy arguments, or the arguments which are actually harmful for the future of Afghanistan and for the future of human society in Afghanistan, unconsciously or consciously, they amongst those people, we need to keep our sanity. We need to make sure that we don't become like them, and we need to avoid using dismissive words. We need to learn how to actively listen, and how to identify the things that are common between us. At the end of the day, there is something that should be common. Uh, we need to learn how to respect the source of their thoughts. I believe that even those who are entertaining very harmful topics, even they have something within themselves that are hurting them. I always say that those who are hurting others are actually holding on to the pains that they couldn't overcome. So I'm looking at all this topic in a very human way. I'm not discussing it very politically or very technically, but again, I'm insisting that listening, respecting, and keeping our sanity and trying best to finding a common ground and sticking to our core values, human values, are very much important to nowadays in Afghanistan.
Thank you, Shukla. By this side.
Just to add, I think Bahir and Shkola addressed the solutions pretty eloquently. Just we have to understand most of the problems that we currently facing are regime agnostic. They are consequences of invasions and 44 years of war, whichever way we want to sort of narrate that war and those invasions. So those are regime agnostic. I had an interesting discussion with a friend, and I said, like, well, it's as bad as it was, and he goes, like, women are not allowed to go to, girls are not allowed to go to school, and I said, yes, that's a horrible thing. Yet when girls were allowed to go to school, we were burying 400 young Afghan men every day. Now pick which one is worse. Of course, it's a very tricky and complicated question, but just to make the point, our problems are regime agnostic. They existed before Taliban. They will continue to exist after Taliban. Uh, the other thing that we have to understand at the larger scale when working with Afghanistan and Afghans, modernization is severely misunderstood in Afghanistan. So when we're working with Afghans and when we're working within Afghanistan, we have to kind of build that mindset somehow to sort of time travel 50 years back when Afghanistan was a normal and kind of naturally evolving state comparable to the neighbors and the region. After that, we didn't have much of a good reference point to start with and say, like, can we go there? Because since the Soviet invasion, everything has been played at the hand of invading forces. So misunderstood modernization plays a great part whenever we go and work into Afghanistan. Let's strike a balance of traditionalism and modernization. And if even if we are talking about modernization, and I admire Bahir for that whenever he mentions a Western kind of authority, then he immediately mentions a hadith or an ayah or ma'pula with it to balance it. And it sounds pretty sort of innate to us Afghans. So that's the two. The third one, which may be a bit harsh, we have to let go of our hero complex. Like most of Afghans have this complex of like trying to do things at the highest or biblical scale and start small. And my suggestion to myself is if we can't do anything, let's start with building our own personal narratives within the framework of objectivity and impose things on ourselves. When we engage with people and we have that respect that Shkola speak about, or the small circles that Bahir spoke about, if we adhere to certain principles as if our life depended on it, that will reflect. That's human 101. If we impose things on ourselves as personal narrative, stay true to that. That will shine through. And how things will evolve, to be quite frank, no one can say anything about it. Ibn Khaldun says history writes itself, and I tend to agree with that. What we can do is define ourselves, define our own narratives, and engage with people within those frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naim Dosai. I'd like to get to questions. So if you guys want to send in your requests, I actually did have questions myself. Ishkolajan, you mentioned that one of the things that you wanted to do as a suggestion was find a common ground or a common goal, I believe you mentioned. Do you have any examples of what some common goals are?
Well, finding common grounds can be very in different situations regarding different things. Actually, nowadays, one of the things that almost everyone agrees on is the girls' education, which is a very good example of having common ground and solidarity regarding something. It's very interesting, and it's very it elates me when I see that even the Taliban, active member of Taliban, are actually advocating for girls' right or for the opening of the girls' school. Take this as an example. If we apply this to all other sides and parts of today's environment or the things that are going in Afghanistan, it will be very much good. We will make a very good progress. The reason that this topic, girls' education or opening the girls' school, is very much receiving very much support from everyone, literally everyone, even the Taliban members, is because I believe that finally everyone have understood the utility of the girls' education, the value of the girls' education, and the necessity of it. And it's very much thrilling to see the support that everyone is giving to it. And there can be other issues as well, especially when it comes to political structure or the way the government is running, the way they are forming the entire system, and the way they are running the entire system, the way they are like appointing or assigning people to very high level jobs or things. We can just imagine if everyone start advocating for political inclusivity, or to include everyone and every ethnicity and every part, even women in the current political structure. I believe that and hopefully we will get a very good result. So there are many things that can be discussed when in terms of finding common ground, and hopefully we'll see that one day.
Thank you very much. Those are all definitely things that we can hope to unify around. Tawa, brother, you gave an assessment for the environment. And I do remember we talked about the consequences, but I also wanted to hear from you as far as solutions to the current communication issues.
Thanks. So, when I did my master's in political psychology, most of my papers were focused on Quran and Islam, and one of my extensive research paper was on the methods that the Quran used to invite people to Islam. And additionally, my thesis was on how do you mitigate Islamophobia. So it was fascinating because it allowed me to look at the Quran from a very different lens, from an analytical lens. And it really gave me a different perspective on the Quran altogether. So, a few key steps as individuals that we can do. And I'm using a model that was put together by a psychologist who was a professor of mine who wrote a book on this. A few key steps that we as individuals can do on mitigating this, right? Mitigating the bias, the prejudice, the hate. So, to begin with, trigger points, cues. If you know that if you're going to put a picture of somebody on your profile and he happens to be a political leader, you can definitely do it, but realize that that may trigger an emotional reaction from certain people that may have lost family member during his regime, right? So if you again, you're more entitled to do it, but that does trigger people. That may trigger, and that may automatically have a certain view of you, and they may not necessarily even look upon you as a potential friend ever. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, we used to advise the companions never to speak ill of Abu Jahl in front of his son Ikramah. We all know Abu Jahl persecuted Muslims, killed Muslims in the most terrible way, but he wanted to make sure that it would not trigger his son, so he told the companions not to say anything about Abu Jahl in front of his son. And he did the same thing with Abdullah bin Ubay, who was also an enemy of Muslims and Islam, in the same manner. The other thing that Shukla Jan mentioned is, starting with common grounds. In Surah Al Imran, Ayah 64, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O people of the book, let us come to an agreement on that which is common between us. Right? Starting off, focus on what is that one thing that I can identify that's common between me and this other person who may be from a different political group. That when we take that such an approach, it breaks the ice. Now we share something in common. Now there's some level of trust. At least if there's no trust, there's no mistrust, or that diminishes. And then additionally, again, to what Shukla and others, as well as Waijan mentioned, understanding people's fears, vulnerabilities, perceived threats, and most importantly, not just being sympathetic, being empathetic, right? Empathy is when you're able to put yourself in their shoes and see the world from their perspective. Then you can see what their vulnerabilities are. So, for example, when there's a regime change, generally minorities have fear. They have fear that their rights might be trampled. They have certain vulnerabilities. Now, the best example I can give you is when Trump came to power in the US, the Muslims were terrified because he had all these anti-Muslim statements. So there was vulnerability. So if you want to understand somebody, if you want to connect with somebody, be empathetic, understand it from their position. That's why there's an ayah of the Quran that says your enemy can become your friend, but if you give him a chance, right? If you understand their fear, their vulnerability, again, that whole concept of giving people a chance or understanding them better. And there's an ayah, another profound ayah of the Quran that listen to both sides of the story. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the most beautiful way showcases the story of Dawood. Two brothers come to him in his court, and he makes a judgment call. I don't want to go into the details. A judgment call only based on hearing one side of the story. So the two brothers are actually angels sent as a test to him, and the two angels then fly away. So he realizes his mistake, and he repents the whole night. And then God accepts his repentance. And then God says that the Dawood that made the mistake is better than the Dawood that had not made the mistake, because he learned a very valuable lesson to listen to both sides of the story before we make a judgment. That is we take that for granted, but I see that happening over and over and over. And then, of course, being patient. Patience is so critical. People go through emotional life cycles, and oftentimes you just need to allow them to just express themselves. They may say nonsense, but allow them to say it, because then they feel like they're heard, right? And not to go too long, I gave many talks on this topic of specifically akhlaq as it relates to engagement with others. There are at least 75 different ayahs of the Quran that speak about how to engage with others, how to better engage with others, right? I'm going to quickly summarize some of the stuff. It says, don't lie, don't spy, don't exalt, don't insult, don't backbite, don't spread gossip, don't make fun of others, don't say what you don't know, don't claim yourself to be pure, don't insult others, false gods, don't criticize small contributions of others, don't accuse others of immorality without proof. Keep your oaths, return a greeting in a better manner, keep your trust and promises, speak nicely even to the ignorant, feed the poor, honor your treaties, restrain your anger. If enemy wants peace, then accept it. Know your enemy can become your close friend. Be just even against yourself, your parents, your relatives, whether it's the rich or the poor. Don't let hatred cause you to be unjust. Speak gently even to the leaders of the disbelief. Turn away from ill speech. Say it's not appropriate to talk slander when it's mentioned to you. Walk in a humble manner. Respond evil with good. Lower your voice and talk moderately. Preach to others in a good, wise manner. Don't turn your cheek away from people in arrogance. Forgive others as you would like to be forgiven by God. Don't order others to do good while you forget it yourself. Be lenient to others and consult them. Make peace between fighting groups. I'm so sorry I've taken a lot more time than expected, but I think there's so much that actually Islam gives us in this area that we've not tapped into. That's the one common denominator that bridges all of Afghanistan, pretty much all, with the exception of maybe 1%. So I think that is one area that we can leverage, and it's already given us prescriptions on how to actually engage with others. Sorry if I've taken too much time. I apologize, but I just wanted to echo that. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. That was really nice. A lot of times, without evidence, without hearing all sides, we walk into a conversation with our minds already made up. I think John also commented on that, and I think it's something that we definitely need to be mindful of. I actually had a question for Bahir as well. So when he talked about the solutions, it was about being the change you want to see, creating a space for like-minded people, and then taking those people out into society. So sounds like a easier formula maybe for diaspora, but what about inside Afghanistan? How would the third step of taking people out into society, how would that, in your opinion, best work given the current environment?
Thank you for asking that. I think Mahmouda had posted something like that as well, but on the other spectrum, whereas what should the diaspora do? But with regards to what it could be done within Afghanistan, a few things. First, I hope everyone has seen Seinfeld, because Seinfeld is very important to understand what to do in political situations, especially in totalitarian regimes. Because there's actually an episode there where they try to come up with their own comedy show, and they think about what the concept of it should be. And eventually, when they're trying to lie their way through the initial screening process, they say we're making a comedy about nothing, right? So basically, the politics of small things is the politics of nothing. What does that mean? That means that um, it's not something tangible. It's not something that you literally look every day and you say, oh, well, I've achieved this improvement, or quantify it. But what that looks like is, being in Afghanistan is better than being outside Afghanistan. How? Because then you are living the change that is happening. What does that mean? So, when I talk to you about checkpoints and Palestine, I genuinely meant it, because in Afghanistan, especially the first few days when the Taliban came to power, the way the Taliban treated the larger population was a direct result of 20 years of them being told that everyone who lived in the cities were godless people, and they served the tawaghit, or the evils of the time, right? So you could see that the way that they would talk to you, they would be talking down to you, they would be stricter. I remember being asked to get out of my car because I just told the checkpoint that the one across the road had just checked my car, so I don't know why he had to do it again. So they were that on edge and that intolerant, but that changed because they interacted with people day in, day out. And then so many things. There are problems, yes, a lot of problems, but then what that looks like within Afghanistan, it means that we start finding like minded people who are not happy with the current situation, but don't think that the replacement of regime is the possible outcome. A, because it's impractical, B, because there's a huge cost of human suffering, and C, because it's not the best way possible. So we start bonding with each other. All of it, it doesn't have to be a diaspora outside inside divide.
look, there's always a sense of civil disobedience to the politics of small things as well. That means that in Poland, when they were doing theater plays, they were discussing controversial topics that the state didn't allow, but somehow they used to have a push and pull with the state and find middle ground to allow them to say a bit more than what they could earlier. And that's happening on social media today. Afghans within Afghanistan are talking about things that they wouldn't before. Look at the traditional media. What were commentators capable of saying before? What can they say now? Yes, there are still limits, but you can still push them. One of the reasons I sit on Afghan channels is exactly that, because there has to be stuff said that pushes the boundary just a little bit more. And then there is the practical stuff of organizing, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a confrontation in the form of a demonstration, but it can be within spaces where initially you're sitting across each other, where you don't have common ground, but you start looking for it. So it can be as simple as having a football field where everyone is showing up and playing football with each other. That's a day-to-day human interaction that's going to change the way people see each other, because you've left the guns outside, you've left the power structures outside, and inside you're just across a dining table. The politics of small things actually starts from a dining table where different political ideologies sit across the table and they all discuss topics that, if they had their posts, if they had their positions and their histories and backgrounds associated to them at that point, they wouldn't have discussed. But that's a safe space around the dining table that they can have these discussions. So I know it sounds theoretical. I know it at times sounds like it's very wishy-washy, it's very hopeful, idealistic, but these changes happen on a daily basis, and they can happen. They've happened in worse situations. It's just that it'll take time. This doesn't happen within a day, but the results are going to come, and we have to keep believing that they will.
Thank you very much. Tawa, brother, do you have any questions for any of our speakers?
No, but we should open it up for the others to pose their question. I know there were quite a few people who had sent a request. So if you'd like to send in your request to ask a question, please feel free. We've opened it up. We've got a couple now. Um, we'll open it up two at a time, and then just keep opening up more as we take on questions. So with that said. I believe Khoshal and then Hellraiser. Khoshal John, please feel free to pose your question, and then we can move on to Hellraiser. And please keep it at 45 seconds.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Tawab and company, thank you for organizing it. I think after hearing everything, I can summarize it in Pashto. This is one of the safest places that we can discuss. Unfortunately, the reality right now is we are beyond a disagreement, and we are in a situation we are advocating actively in these spaces for violence. And of all human collective organizations or activities, the most difficult thing to organize is violence. And we've been doing that openly. And I've been in some spaces. It has been said openly to take up your arms, and our Twitter feed is filled with pictures of other Afghans dead in one group celebrating versus the other. So I guess, what is the remedy? I think we are beyond the disagreement. What can we do to counter this and believe in an alternative, imagined order that preserves our peace, at least mentally here? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Jaim Dilse, would you like to answer that question?
Well, first of all, I really enjoyed Khoshal's summarization of the problem, that we are beyond disagreement. But let's not forget that element of calling for violence has always been there. And thanks God, we are not all on the street with our guns in our hands. And there are brilliant minds like Tawab and Michelle and their group that they have organized this space. So I would still suggest the same thing, like identify with ourselves. Honestly, that's the best we can do. Like there is a lot of material out there that we can quote and we can reference. But even if we go Islamically, even if we go philosophically, historically, sociologically, psychologically, the best starting point is ourselves. Let's start with ourselves. Let's define ourselves in a way that others can recognize us. We have a tendency of changing stances. Let's build that sort of resilience towards this is my stance. I'm a peace activist and I will continue to be on this stance. And that's that. If we build, let's say, honestly, 20 individuals that they will say Afghanistan first, no war to Afghanistan, no violence, progressive Afghanistan, that would be a lot of change. And in terms of violence, unfortunately, having worked pretty deep at the government and having witnessed a lot of things, I think influencing the war is far beyond our spaces or even our daily engagements. What we can do is whatever is within our limits. And if we utilize that to the best of our ability, that's that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Hellraiser. I don't know if you want me to use your name.
Hi. Thank you very much for giving me the mic. It was excellent hearing all of the guests and the speakers today. So I just had a comment. I listened to what Ubaidullah Bayer said very intently, and I did like all the comments he made about just looking at things at the micro level rather than the big narratives. It seems to me that information warfare is going on, because you can see that very motivated groups try to manipulate news to benefit them. And unfortunately, it is done by all parties. NRF does that, Taliban does that, and everyone in between. So all sides use this tool for advantage. And, most of them are very organized as well. So the news that go viral do so for very specific political reasons. So last week, for example, it was that news about Ilaha and Khosti. And then, a few hours later, there was this counter narrative about what really happened, etc. And, I'd go as far as saying that maybe some money changes hands in this warfare as well. So I'm just wondering, how far can we get with this argument of, reasonableness and trying to set the example, etc. Because it seems to me that, this is basically war strategy, war situation where we are. So that was my question / comment.
Hellraiser, was that specific to Ubaidullah?
If Ubaidullah has a comment about it, I would love to hear it.
Hellraiser. Well, it's funny referring to you with that name, but astaghfirullah. Look, I think that one of the goals of the misinformation campaigns is to make you believe in its effectiveness and in its scale. It isn't as big or as real as you are made to believe. I want you to actually go and check most of these very polarizing accounts and see the content that they're posting and open the list of people that have liked it. I am willing to bet an arm that you will find 70 to 80% of those accounts to be fake and bots, right? So, and God bless Karzai Saib. I have a lot of respect for him in a few sectors, but he's the one who created this culture of manufacturing news in Afghanistan and manufacturing popularity.
So they actually hired people that would sit, and their complete job was to make it appear like certain things were happening. This kept happening till the very last day, not only through Idare Umur, but with Shura Amniyat, with through Mohib's office, where people were specifically hired, where specific organizations were hired to get their bots to like accounts and like information, to make it look like this is actually real and this is genuine grievance. So, and that's why being in Afghanistan actually helps, because it's not like there aren't problems. It's not like there aren't ethnic tensions within Afghanistan that haven't existed. And like Rahim Dil pointed out, that these are historic. They have a legacy. They didn't start today. But they want you to believe that things are happening now, and they're happening at a large scale, and there is no form of coexistence that can happen. So don't fall for that. The only good thing that we can do now is, because the mediascape has come into the person's locus of control as well, means that not only are you a source of news, but you are also a source of fact checking that news. So call out people, call out news that isn't sourced. Do not share news that isn't either placed or timed, or isn't sourced properly. Tribal elders do not message people in Canada or in Europe telling them that something happened. Tribal elders don't have WhatsApp or Signal or internet. Heck, getting internet in Kabul is such a pain. How are these people communicating with these journalists? So don't believe that. Even today, there's news that protesters in Paktia, girls have been taken away. I am 110% sure that the Taliban in Paktia had officially organized the protest today, right? Why would they arrest those girls? So, but then someone is going to turn around and tell you, look, girls were arrested. And then how they do it is they layer it up, so it's a butterfly effect or a Chinese whisper. You hear it from the sixth source, who is referencing a source before him, and eventually it starts with a tribal elder or sources tell me, or other people who keep telling you that they're losing family members every day without giving you any reference to it, right? And all of these are problematic narratives, but as long as we keep telling ourselves that these are fake and we keep calling them out, even the bystander is eventually going to figure it out. Just like these major networks are already now being exposed to people. So keep calm, keep going on. As long as we are principled, things will sort themselves out.
I would like to just add a short comment in there. I mean, what is the extent of our responsibility? Either we can keep up these spaces, local engagement, online engagement with other parties, or alternatively go and pick up a gun. So I have made it upon myself that I will never put up a gun in Afghanistan, because that is the root of all evils in Afghanistan. So either I continue this, or be at a mindset like, oh, this is nothing. I cannot do anything significant. Between picking up a gun and doing nothing, this is the best we can do right now.
Thank you so much. That was so insightful, and I really appreciate the input from both Bahir Saib and Rahinder Saib. We have our next questionnaire from Bharat for India. Bharat, please open your mic, and if you can keep it to 45 seconds so we can allow others, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the mic. First of all, whenever I look at Afghanistan and I look at America in Afghanistan, I always get that feeling of Britain in India. That sort of, some call it occupation, somebody can call it guidance, whatever you want to call it. But I see the difference, say, in America leaving Afghanistan and Britain leaving India. So what happened when Britain had, it took 150 years, but they occupied India, large portions of India. When the Indian society came in contact with the British society, and they found themselves to be the thinkers, the intellectuals of the Indian society, they realized that Indian society is socially backward vis-a-vis the Western society. The condition of women is very backward. They realized it, and the two type of movements within the society started. One was the revivalist movement, another was the reformist movement. The latter one was apologetic. Okay, fine. Sorry, these things are there. Sorry, but we are changing. Revivalist was said, no, these things are distortions. Let's go back to the Vedas. These things, and we have to have women priests, and we need to focus on women education. So this type of thing, when the British maybe the nature of occupation, sudden attack, a lot of killings, that the way it took place, uh, there is no, I see no social impact of the of American occupation of Afghanistan as compared to India. The British social impact is very huge, very great. And if at the time of the British coming to India, the condition of Hindu women was worse than that of the Muslim women. That's a fact. But the thinkers, when they came in contact with the West, then they realized, they admitted their own shortcomings. These are the shortcomings in our society. Some said that no, it's not a shortcoming, it's some distortions that our society is pristine, is pure, free. And so they, in a way, fortified their society. But I don't see it in Afghanistan. I don't see that social renaissance sort of thing. Thank you.
Who would like to take that, respond to that comment by Bharat?
I'd have a go at it. Good observation, Bharat. A few things, as you pointed it out. The context of Afghanistan and India is slightly different because the stay of Brits in India was a couple of centuries and even more. In Afghanistan, it was a couple of decades, whether it's Russians or Americans. In India, they were accepted. In Afghanistan, they were fought against. That's what I can say. Like, it's not easy to compare the two if we go academically about them. But yes, of course, there are many movements such as this. I would call this Renaissance, to be honest. Even if that sounds arrogant, because I am part of the panel. So there are things happening. It's too quick, too early to sort of organize all the things as we wish. But it is happening. The context of India is slightly different to the context of Afghanistan. And that's that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mahmouda John, you messaged me. We'll go to you next for your question.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Yeah, Obaidullah and everybody else that's on ground in Afghanistan. This is my first time going back in a little over 10 years. As diaspora, what can you recommend for me to expect going back in the current regime, at least?
Rahamdil Sip, I'll just give a short answer. Maybe you can explain better. Um, Look, Mahmoud Ajan, initially, and this is an advice I give to a lot of my friends, is um, do not generalize your experience. And this has been the bane of Twitter and Afghanistan on social media. Everyone goes there, spends a few days, and then tells you what they think Afghanistan is like. Someone walks through a street and tells you, oh, Afghanistan is Gulo Gulzar and there is no security concern. Everyone's leaving their shops open, right? Or on the other sense, some will tell you that Afghanistan is a hellhole and there's no saving it, and so on and so forth. So take your experiences as they come. Also note that you are coming without a point of reference. So your 10-year ago reference point is very outdated. So whatever you will be experiencing will be on the go. So try to compare it to whatever time you spend there. So within that context. But what you can actually do to help, I think, you will have people within your private circles that don't have that kind of access to Afghanistan. Or even if they do have that kind of access, they don't trust the people that give them that information about Afghanistan. So you will become the lens with which they see Afghanistan. So show them Afghanistan, show them what is happening on the ground. And I think very quickly you will pick up on what you can do. I think even if you have any savings or you have family members that want to help in Afghanistan, do take the money in, do fly it in as cash, because it'll be very difficult to get money inside Afghanistan. Stay within the major cities, but connect with organizations that are working on the ground. Don't reinvent the wheel.
Don't find people to get to do all the work all over again. Just find the organizations that are working there, connect with them, go on the ground, sit there, talk to the people that you're helping. That really does help, because I mean, I went to Paktika, and when we were in Barmal, honestly, the one thing that made the people the happiest was them saying, "We don't care for what you've brought. We care that you're here and you care enough to travel here and talk to us," right? So that means a lot, because the major scarcity is that of hope. It's not of material object. So, and you'll figure out your way. You're a smart enough person to know what to do on the ground, but it's good to be mindful of these few steps that will help you keep steadfast. Also, connect with either of us. I am not in Afghanistan, but I should be next week. So, if you need anything on the ground, please do not hesitate to reach out. And God bless you for wanting to go back home.
Thank you so much for your insight. I took a note of everything. I'm definitely gonna implement everything that you said. Is there anything that you all can recommend as far as a cultural shock goes? Is there anything that I should, as diaspora, not go ahead and do? Because I mean, I got a few messages saying that they see people come from the West be very flashy. So, is there anything that you would recommend that you may think I possibly do in my day-to-day life to not do back home?
Shkalajan, would you like to address this question?
Yes, of course. So it depends that where are you going, Mahmouda John. If you are going to Kabul, I think it's not a big deal to go there and to adjust yourself with the environment. But if you are going to any other province or like villages, or meeting your relatives like in remote areas of Afghanistan, then I think it's good to be mindful of for example, it sounds a bit weird to say, but the way you behave, or the way you talk, and obviously clothing, the way you dress up is important, to respect their culture, or to respect, to not give them the idea that I am different than you, or I am superior than you. So it's always good to dress the way they dress, to behave the way they expect you to behave. And it's just like to create the very vibrant and the harmony between you and them. Otherwise, I believe that the people of Afghanistan, especially those living in the villages and remote areas, they are very lovely, they are very warm people. Unlike the people of city, they are very understanding. They understand that you have come from a different country and different culture, and they will not irritate you that much. I myself lived in, have spent time in villages. They are very, they have the hospitality. They are very understanding, warm, and welcoming people. But obviously, the points that I said, I think dressing up will be the major point, because obviously the first impression is the last impression. And I think love love is the common language between human beings. As far as you are friendly, as far as you are respectful, no matter what language do you speak, or no matter what is your like Pashto or Dari accent, they will just welcome you. And as far as it's about living in Kabul, that's not a big deal, since Kabul is the capital, and people are like very open to embrace the new culture, or newcomers, or Western culture, or Western dressing ups, or the way you talk or behave. Yeah, that's it.
Also, Shkulajan, my personal opinion is, and I do practice this, because whatever is said, I do have a privileged position, or a relative safety net, which I have it by virtue of belonging to a family. You have it by virtue of having a foreign passport. So when you are in Afghanistan, especially within Kabul, know that you can push that boundary a little. And if I were you, I would be a little rebellious about it. I mean, me and Rahamdil very often, maybe too often, wear pants and Western clothing in Kabul, and the Taliban don't really like that. But push them to accept that, because there will be people in Kabul that will live that way, right? So maybe have that rebel spirit to a certain extent. Just don't overdo it, because hashtag find Mahmouda is going to be difficult to sustain.
Well, I didn't want to scare Mahmouda, and considering the fact that she is a she, so I just wanted her to be on safe side. And I mentioned that dressing, the point of dressing up when if she, in case she wants to go to rural, remote areas or villages, for example, if she wants to travel to Kandahar or to any other place, so obviously she need to be mindful of the way she dress. And one thing more that this is a very silly comment, but be careful with what you eat and how you drink, what you eat and what you drink, because it might affect your health. Since let me make a joke, since you are an Azdana going from West to Kabul, so just to be careful with your health, be careful with what you eat and what you drink.
Thank you so much, Shkula. And I can't promise that Find Mahmouda isn't going to be a trending hashtag within the first 24 hours that I land. I am going to be in Kanar, so it's going to be very different from, I guess, what I'm expecting from Kabul. But I do have a lot of family that I'm going to go back home to, so they're definitely going to show me the ropes along with everything that you all just told me. So once again, thank you all for your insight.
A small input, Mahmouda Jan. If you can afford, buy a laptop, take it to Kunar, give it as a gift to a group of 10 girls. Thank you.
Of course, yeah. I'm trying to gather as much technology that I can, like recyclable technology that I have. I just don't have a lot of connects. I was gonna go and buy maybe 3 or 4 laptops, but I mean the funding for that is, I mean, I'm not, I live in the West, but I'm not living in the White House. But unfortunately, I only got one laptop that I'm able to take back and a few iPads. So I'm gonna see what I can do with that, inshallah. If there's anything else that anybody's able to recommend for me, I'll go ahead and take that as well.
One last quick point, Mahmoud, if you can, just for your own, I guess, for your own sake, just take a one of those GoPro cameras for your own experience and try to capture as much of it as possible. And then, of course, you can share it with others, family, and others. It's always good to. The reason why I bring that up is because when people like you and others actually go, it helps with the economy. It stimulates the economy because right now people are living in very difficult time. So it would be a good opportunity for others to have the courage and go. Thanks.
One last point, Mahmouda Jan, then we can turn to the other guests. I envy you, actually. You are the lucky one that you are able to go back to home, and I wish I could join you. I wish I could go back to home, and I hope that one day I'll go back to home as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. So, before we go to our next speaker, I just want to make a quick recommendation. Uh, we at ASIF put together a video on Afghanistan. It's in line with much of our conversation about pursuing peace, right? How do we ensure that we don't end up going through another civil war of some sort? So, if you guys can actually please, after this space, watch the video. If you can click on Afghan SEF, the co-host, watch the video, and subsequently, if you like and agree, please like it and reshare it. Thanks. That said, we'll go to Muhammad Naeem as our next questionnaire. Please, Brother Naeem, please unmute yourself and keep it to 45 seconds so we can have other people also speak.
Yes. Well, before I ask my question, I'd like to make a couple of points. One is that we are in few vicious circles, I'm afraid. One is that the lack of communication, which is caused by lack of good education in many years of wars we have been in. The second one is poverty and instability. Well, poverty fuels instability, and instability creates poverty. That's another one. The solutions, I think, instead of common ground, which we have to look for it, common interest is more important. Common interest, which should be which we call it national interest, basically. So everything we do, we say, and even our thoughts should be in line with national interest. Once we correct our mindset and we just go that way, then slowly things get better. Having said all that, here's my question. The war is very expensive. 40-50 years of war cost trillions of dollars. Who's paying for this? Do you guys think that we are in this global conspiracy or part of this global conspiracy? And who's behind all this? Where is going to end? Which direction is going to go? And in what stages of this, if you believe in this conspiracy, in at which stage of this conspiracy are we in now, and how far are we going to go? Do you guys see Talibans as good leaders, or that they can kind of, take us through all this turbulent time? So that's it. That was my question. Thank you.
Rahamdisib, since you're the major Taliban whitewasher, maybe you should answer this question first.
Thank you, Bahir. I never had faith in any of the Afghan governments since my adult life, pretty much most of it. But as a rational citizen, I've never advocated or worked for collapsing of regimes, because collapse of regime is quite expensive, and we have to wake up to that. Every time a regime collapses, we go back at least 30 to 40 years, and we are already 100 and few years behind. In terms of the cost of war, I think it's a well-documented fact, and it's not an opinion anymore. Russians paid the first invasion cost, which was very heavy on their economy and caused them a lot of problems internally. And the US paid, NATO paid a lot of the second invasion. Of course, there were Saudis and Arab states as well. But Afghanistan, I often and strongly speak up about this. Our current war is not our war. It is an imposed war. The other people are giving us money. The other people are giving us narrative. The other people are giving us military hardware. We are just being killed. And that's the reality of this war. That's why I have nothing with it. And fully, in all my senses, I'm a peace activist, anti-war. Where we going, at what stage things will change, I think it will be very ambitious to predict that, because there is a lot of moving parts into this. Again, I'll repeat Ibn Khaldun, history writes itself. I mean, it would take only the passing of Joe Biden for things to change, or a political shift between NATO and Russia, or a political shift between Russia and China, or Russia. So there is a lot of moving parts to it, and we cannot easily pinpoint what will happen. Again, what we can pinpoint, how we engage with this reality, and that's the best we can do. Thank you.
شكرا سيب ما 2 دقيقة إجازة راكي ببطأ كنت يا تو خبريكو بما تورك.
هلكم بيسب ميرامي.
Just 3 very short points. For starters, regarding conspiracy theories, I actually had a wonderful lecturer of terrorism, and it isn't what it sounds. He wasn't teaching us terrorism. He was teaching us what to do in the face of terrorism. So he used to say that he wasn't a fan of conspiracy theories, and a famous line I remember of him was, he's like, I've known friends for over 2 decades, and someday they sit across me and they start telling me about this conspiracy theory, and in my eyes, I lose all respect for them, and I lose a friend that day. So maybe you shouldn't be that harsh, but then again, like, it's very easy to blame outsiders. So one. Number two, the biggest enemies of Afghanistan have been Afghans themselves. So it hasn't been external. Yes, it has been funded from abroad, but it has always had actors within Afghanistan that have helped execute those plans for whatever situation we face today. And thirdly, I think with regards to Islam as well, it's really important to understand what the rules of engaging in violent action against a ruler is, right? So again, Islam doesn't have a set defined method of a ruler coming to power, but when they are in power, it is called al-qiyam al-hakim, which means to rebel against those in power. And there are different conditions for when that can happen. But two things that I wanted to point out. One was Sheikh bin Baz says that the two conditions in which that you can rebel against someone in power is if A, they commit kufr, and B, that you know that the suffering that this rebellion is going to cause isn't going to be larger than the suffering that you are going through right now. So it is conditioned, both of them are an and. But also Imam Ibn Taymiyyah used to say that, or even Imam, I think not Ibn Taymiyyah, Imam Ahmad, when Ma'mun stood up and said that I believe the Quran is a creature, a creation of God, right? He did not advocate for a violent rebellion against Ma'mun. And one of his reasons that he states is, I didn't do it because the person who is committing the kufr or leaving Islam has to acknowledge it themselves that they are what they are doing is kufr. Since Ma'mun didn't see it as kufr, he didn't think that he could stand up to him. So like there are a lot of layers, and we have to be very mindful of the cost everything incurs. So cost benefit analysis is a part of our moral judgment, and if we do abide by it, hopefully things wouldn't keep getting uglier.
I want to add a few points. Well, first of all, unlike Rahamdal said, I'm not an order peace activist. I believe that at some points, at some era of time, we need war. And but even though I am I believe that sometimes military resistance or armed conflict or war is important, but still I believe that there are some rules and regulations and limitations to that war. So, as far as the war was, the war is formatted as far as we are conducting a war under the certain laws and limitations and degrees. For example, the war against Taliban under the Republic regime was fair for me, and I am a very huge supporter of Afghan National Security Forces. But at some points, with the time passes on, my mindset has changed to that. Now war is not an option, because nowadays, considering the current situation, war is not beneficial for Afghanistan. And when it comes to peacemaking and peacekeeping is a very, very difficult missions. They are time consuming. They require skillful peoples. They require resources. Unlike war. War can be initiated, violence can be initiated by very random people, very uneducated people. Some angry, upset, madman men can just get up and pick up a gun and kill dozens of people around themselves. So with I'm insisting again that to break the cycle of violence, to break the cycle of conflict and bloodshed, at some points we need to come to this point that okay, it's enough, and we need to resort to negotiations. We need to resort to peace building. And when it comes to peace building, one thing that should be very, very clear is that when you want to build peace and when you want to keep that peace, violence should be violence is out of the question. Violence shouldn't be an option. Conflict can be. When we say conflict doesn't necessarily mean violence. Conflict can be resolved by peaceful and diplomatic ways, but violence shouldn't be an option. and we shouldn't entertain topics that are entertaining or supporting violence nowadays that we are witnessing in Afghanistan. Some like for example NRF, I'm against NRF because they are literally advocating for violence. They are literally advocating for armed resistance, which will result further bloodshed and catastrophe. And unfortunately, those who are tend to like those who are claiming the leadership of this resistance, they themselves are sitting in abroad, living their luxurious lives, and they are just using some very, for example, Bachai Gharib as their ground fighters, and they're just playing their power politics, trying to secure their personal interests, which is very vicious and which is very unacceptable. So we need to, with time, we need to change our mind. And as I mentioned before, we need to keep our sanity. We need to find the common ground, and we need to agree on certain human values and certain national values and national interests. Sometimes people say that what are the national interests? Sometimes people say that we don't have any well-defined national interests. I believe that, yeah, we don't have like a number or a list of well-defined national interests, but there are few things that are, I think every Afghan citizen would agree about it. That, for example, Afghanistan, solidarity, freedom, development, eradication of poverty, or women's rights. These are like certain values that we don't need to redefine, and we don't need to constantly talk about it or negotiate it. These shouldn't be changed with the time. It haven't changed since the republic. It's not these values are not changed even under this regime, and it should not change in the future. So this we need to work to advocate for these values that I mentioned: basic human rights, liberties, freedoms, development, and meaningful peace at the end.
Thank you very much, Gula John. I think we're going to start winding down. I'm going to go to the last two questions. I mean, I could listen all day, but I don't want to hold our speakers too long. I believe it was Shahi Sadat.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk. I think I believe that we're at war in every moment since our birth. Even we're at war within our inside, and sometimes you you have to fight back. For example, right now, what's going on in Afghanistan, the women education. Like if I have my daughter there, I mean, everyone, right? Not just my daughter, but all these girls who are crying for education since 1 year. And I think this is the duty of every civilized human being to stand with them. Even the other day, the girls went one day to in Paktia province for one day in school, and then Taliban closed it again. So this is one issue. Coming back, Ubaidullah John said that I blame entirely on Afghans. I think we have to look, when we look something, we have to go back further. Since 40 years, the fund that in the Cold War, the fund that went to Pakistan to brainwash us. I'm sorry, this is just a train. 1 second, if you, it will go pass by, and then, sorry. Sorry, yeah, it's gone. Sorry, yeah. And
So
if we see how much money have been used in Cold War to brainwash our children, the children, the poor children, in those madrasas, those 45,000 madrasas in Pakistan, we have to look who funded them. Even the Western country there, they were publishing those books to those children. Yet when we blame our culture, this culture which I grew up in Afghanistan when I was a child, we would call Hindu Lala. My father would go to Jalalabad and we would buy stuff from Hindu and we call them Lala. We had Jews around us. They were living there. They had the same kind of dress like Afghan. There was a wedding party. I got a picture of that. This was no difference than a Pashtun girls, our Tajik girls, our Hazara girls. They were looking all the same. We lived next to each other. We loved each other. Suddenly, this is vanished. This is gone. The things they planted in my mind, the hatred, the jihadists who planted this hatred in my mind. Is I'm responsible for that? When I went as a child to Pakistan, when from every mosque they said the Jews are enemy, the Christian are enemy, the Hindu are enemy, the atheists are enemy. Who planted that? Was this my culture? No. So I'm coming back to Ubaidullah Jan that I don't think. For a long time I believed it. Look, the people who got up in the street in millions in Waziristan and also Baluchistan, they're saying they're denying they don't allow their terrorist training camp in their land. But still Pakistani army is doing the same thing. But the word is silent. Look, when there was an interest of the Western country, I was here in California. I was a student at the time.
Shahi
From
Saib,
every corner, they were crying
please,
the
Shahi Saib,
Afghan women
if
are
you can
oppressed.
please
But
summarize it
today,
in
when the schools
Shahi
are
Saib.
closed, no one is talking about that. No one is even.
My sincere apologies, Shahi Saib. If you could please summarize it. If you have a question, please feel free to ask. If you can summarize it in 30 seconds, we've gone way overboard in terms of time, and we also want to stick to the topic, which is how do we pursue on better engagements and agreeing to disagree. So if I apologize for muting you, but I just want to make sure we stick to the topic. And if you have a question, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, thank you. My point is that we shouldn't blame ourselves for that, and we are always in a war. We have to stand with our people, and with any time, every time. This is my last thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sherry. So, we will. Well, actually, before we go on, um,
I think his comment was directed towards Bahir, so if you want to give him a second to answer that.
Give him a
yes,
30-second response. Shaisip, I really respect your opinion. I do understand what you're saying. I hope I wasn't misconceived to be saying that no one else was involved. But at the core of it, yes, there are always factors that push us to do things. Yes, the international community thought that the Afghan jihad was popular and served their interests. But at the end of the day, everything was executed through Afghans. So I'm just trying to take more of the responsibility than labeling anyone outside. But yes, it's unfortunate that we are here and we have to keep trying to change it, try to go back to times when we coexisted and were more tolerant of each other. So I respect what you're saying and I completely agree with it.
I want to add one comment to that. I completely understand where Shahi Saib's coming from, but we also, a lot of us tend to paint the monarchy times as the best days, and in many ways, it was very. There was a peace. People were not at war with each other, and people did get along. Like I attribute that a lot of that to Islam and our culture. But let's not also forget, dear beloved brothers and sisters, that when you speak with a Hazara or other minorities, and they say we were not well represented in those monarchy times, that did cause a lot of pent up aggression over time. That is a cause of concern. So I'm saying this because it took me a while to put myself on their shoes and empathize with them to say, yes, we didn't have a minister who was a Hazara. We didn't have a minister from many other minorities. They were not well represented in that time. And that is a fact that we cannot deny. And I hope that our future governments are far more well represented. So this way we don't go through that vicious cycle. That's the only thing I wanted to add. But please, Mirwais, feel free to ask your question, and then we can move. We can have closing remarks.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Tawab and all of the distinguished guests here and brothers and sisters. Salam to everybody. My question was, a variety of topics were discussed here, and one of the questions that I have is, as a youth, people who the younger generation, the next generation that has to cope with the reality that Islamic Emirate is our government, and uh, we have families there. We have our poor people there that live their day to day lives. Uh, how can we engage the government from the diaspora? Because let's remember that we are the second largest population of refugees around the world, and we have a lot of people, a lot of Afghans that are well educated in different sectors of society in these different countries that are in love with their own country and that want to help their country. So I wanted to find a way, or my question is, how can we find a way to engage the government in a meaningful manner that could help from different sectors, from different skill sets that we have to bring to Afghanistan to uplift, our people and our country for the better. I think that my suggestion is that I want at least one generation of Afghans to grow up without any war or conflict and just think about for the betterment of the future of Afghanistan. And I think we're at a crossroads that if we put ourselves together and we come together as a unit, I think we could actually accomplish that. Yes, does the government today that's in charge have problems? Yes, of course, and we have to engage that in a positive manner to move forward and solve our problems in a peaceful manner. I'm not like Rahimdil's brother said. I'm not for war. And we have enough of war, and it has not helped us. So let's think about peace, and let's think about engaging each other, and that's what matters to me personally. So my question again is, how can we engage the government as individuals who have certain skill sets to help the people there? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Uh, Having lived as a diaspora myself, I would suggest a few things. First is we have to get better at networking within the diaspora. Like we have like Indian diaspora, Israeli diaspora. They helped build their countries, basically brought them to become one of the credible powers of the world. So to better networking, apply political pressure. And I think if we get, let's say, 100,000 signature on any platform and direct it to any European or American or Western parliament, that will become a debate there. That's one thing we can do, apply political pressure on the governments of your host countries to engage with Afghanistan, with the Afghan people, because the problem we've had historically, all the engagements have been with the Afghan governments, and Afghan governments have been historically imposed on Afghan people. We have hardly elected governments. Even the elections were tricky ones. I'm not going to go there. The second one is engage with Afghanistan through charity activities, because right now our people are suffering beyond imagination. And if we can engage on those two fronts, help in whatever capacity that we can back home, and apply political pressure on our host governments to engage with with Afghanistan and the Afghan people, and listen to Afghan people and how to move from there. That would be a wonderful outcome. Thank you.
Just to interject for a few seconds, Mirwais, you can also join OSIF, which kind of does that from a charity perspective as well as helping people in Afghanistan.
Look at you, Tawa, plugging in the organization here. Um, but yeah, just as a side
Yeah,
note,
I really enjoyed the networking skill of Tawab Jan there.
yeah,
Well
he's
done,
selling
Tawab Jan.
his product here. Um, Um, I mean, yes, I completely agree. It's really important, especially the diaspora. I mean, Raham Dilse pointed out that the diasporas have been the reason nations have failed. the diaspora have been reasons why certain nations did well. The Tamil Tigers, till the end of their existence, were constantly funded and supported by diaspora from outside. So there is much that can be done. I would just want you to understand that I talked about politics of small things initially, and just stripping the power structure of the power that it has, so then you can engage with each other and be acknowledged as a partner rather than as an opponent. And that works especially even with aid work, and I've seen that happen, because you see how the Taliban show up at restaurants and at all the places where they shouldn't show up with their guns. They do carry them, but I've actually um, stop them from walking into distribution sites with their weapons. Why? Because I'm distributing there. They know I'm helping the community. And by virtue of having taken up that space, I can be acknowledged and I can demand certain changes in behavior, right? And you, by engaging with aid effort, will have that way of opportunity of engaging with the Taliban. But yes, Afghanistan needs skilled people. If you have the luxury of coming to Afghanistan, of working there. But at the core of it, at the end of the day, this is something I've told a lot of politicians as well. The ball is in the Taliban's court. It's a football match. And if they refuse to play, nothing is going to come out of it. So they really have to change their attitude as well. They can't say, we want diaspora to return, whereas they're arresting Afghans within Afghanistan or abducting them or torturing them. So they have to create these opportunities. I mean, Ashraf Ghani's one thing that Ashraf Ghani was doing probably right was he'd created this office where he was collecting Afghans from the diaspora, bringing them to Afghanistan, helping them pitch into the development. And it was unfortunate that most of them were just glorified translators, and it gave them very unequal power compared to the experience that they had. But the concept wasn't bad, and the Taliban can do something similar. But there has to be willingness to accommodate Afghans, to accommodate non-Taliban, and we haven't seen that willingness so far. So let's hope that changes.
I think with that, we will go to our closing remarks, and we'll go in the same order that we. Actually, we'll reverse the order because we just heard from Bahir Saib. So we'll start off with Rahim Dil Saib, and then Shukla Jan, and then Bahir Saib.
Thank you very much. I think I spoke enough, and there has been a wealth of ideas shared and brilliant questions. So yeah, that suffices for me. Thank you.
Shukla Jan, your closing remarks.
Well, thank you, Tawab Seb and Michelle, for conducting this speech, for inviting us over, and I hope that for the upcoming spaces and discussions, we would be able to have and invite those who have the contrast opinions and the contrast beliefs and thoughts. So only then we will be able to practice the title of this space, agree to disagree. Hopefully in future we will have a variety of people with variety of mindsets, and thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be a part of this space.
Point well taken. We actually considered it and reached out to certain people, but unfortunately, at least the one person I reached out to, they said they're not going to do it. So, but yes, I should have made more of an effort to try to get people. But I think if sometimes if people actually come into this kind of a space, then the cat's going to be out of the hat. So they'll have to make a commitment to engage, and many people don't want to now. Bahir Saib, your closing remarks, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, sorry. Okay. I think we've spoken on a lot of issues, and I don't want to dwell into concepts that we have already covered. But personally, I think that where we were 1 year ago isn't where we are today, and that doesn't necessarily mean things have improved. I think our understanding of the situation has improved, and that in itself is a overall improvement because we have more tools to address the situation at hand, and hopefully we can find ways through it for starters. Number two, I know it's very difficult. I know we have talked about polarizing voices, but I'm still up for breaking echo chambers. So the dialogue isn't only happening with those in power, but the dialogue has to happen with those that don't share our opinion or views as well, which is why I have constantly reached out to people who do not see eye to eye with me politically or with regards to my approach to Afghanistan. And I want us to have a discussion, and I want us to have it in a public space because this is how the world is. That's how you create polarized sections, and we keep drifting apart. And I just wish that there was willingness because there are two general principles that I follow in life. One is the Prophet said that there's a special place in heaven for man taraka al-mira'a walau kana ala haqq, who leaves needless argumentation even if they were on the right side, right? And secondly, innaka la tahdi man ahbabt, you do not get to choose who accepts your message and who doesn't, because then it just becomes very frustrating. So the ultimate goal is to try to find amongst your opponents people that are willing to listen, that are willing to engage, and find common ground, because I don't know everything and I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. I'm willing to change my ways. I am not the person I was 1 year ago. I'm not the person I was 5 years ago. And that's what growth is. And that's where the light comes in from. So just this, let's just be mindful of that, engage from a positive mindset. Do not push it to a point where it becomes meaningless. Break the echo chambers, create spaces for like minded people to get together, and then try to reach out and take spaces that already exist. And we've already talked about different examples. I hope that has been hopeful and helpful for those who joined us today.
Thank you so much, Wailo John, and Shukla John and Rahim Dil Saib. I can't thank you enough for all the insightful information. I think it was fruitful, and we need to do more of this. And point well taken on inviting others who disagree with us. I completely who disagree. Well, to be fair, to be fair, and this is public information. Bahir Saib and I have disagreed on many things online, and he's criticized me for it, and back and forth. But I still, value his opinion, and I will always listen to him. And I'm sure it's the same between myself and Shukla John as well as Rahim Dilsai.
Exactly.
So it's a start. But yes, I would like to get other people involved. We would.
And to persuade them to come to spaces, maybe you need to promise them shin chai and charmags, and then they will come over.
I think it'll take a little bit more than that, but sure. But no, I've tried it at my own personal level to make sure I engage and understand where they're coming from. But completely agree. Once again, Bahir Saib has a charity organization in Afghanistan that does phenomenal work, and I can't thank him enough. So if anybody wants to work and engage with them, please feel free to reach out to them. And of course, Rahim Dil Saib is going back to Afghanistan after the past few weeks. So please network with him if there's anything you want to do. And then please follow them, engage with them. If you have any ideas, any organizations that you want to leverage their help or assistance, they're the gems of our this generation. And we look forward for them to chalk a pathway that our future other generations could not. And I hope that will pave the way for better days ahead for the generation that will come. So I thank them from the bottom of my heart. And please follow us on Twitter. Join us if you'd like to engage on doing similar activities based on what Rahim Dilsaib said, as far as engaging policymakers for a more humane policy for Afghanistan, which is really to alleviate the suffering of sanctions on the people, as well as what we can do in Afghanistan in terms of actual work to get people jobs. So thank you again. With that said, I'll leave it to my colleague to make a last closing statement, and then we will call it a day. Thank you again all for joining.
I just want to thank everyone for coming. Thank the speakers for their insights. Thank you guys for your patience, and hope to see you guys in the next space.